This is Gradowski of WeAreChange.org here in Paris, France, to yet again cover the Yellow Vest movement, which is going into its 13th week of protest. We're, of course, going to be on the ground live streaming everything that's happening, and in this specific video, we're going to give you all the latest updates and important information that, of course, you're not getting on the mainstream media, not only in the United States, but also in France, about this larger, bigger movement that, honestly, is not going away anytime soon. Now, there's a lot of important developments, and that's why for this video we're going to be interviewing our source on the ground here, Bob, who of course is not really named Bob, is anonymous. The first time we did a video interview about the Yellow Vest movement, it got over 1 million views. Since then, the video stagnated ever since there's a lot of talk by the mainstream media about how social media was empowering this movement, and surprisingly, the view counter has been stuck at where it has been. But a lot of things have been changing here dramatically, and I'm just shocked talking to Bob over here about all the things happening here, about people who work for Amazon who supported the Yellow Vest and were fired, about the diplomatic situation with Italy. But Bob, I'm just going to let you talk because you're here on the ground. You talk to some of the leadership. You talk to some of the kind of figureheads, organizers of the Yellow Vest movement. And what are some of the most important things that are happening here that people aren't getting on the mainstream media? What are some of the most important developments here?
I would imagine that people tend to understand things from the mainstream media, especially from the United States, but other countries, that in France the Yellow Vest movement has been somehow, evolving into a kind of something that is not really exploding, that is not really having a real effect on French policies. What I think is most important is that you have to imagine that at least 18 people have lost their eyes in the streets just because they were in the streets, and they were mostly not violent. Some of them, and the majority of them, is right now even more active than ever before. They're right now part of the reason also why many more people have been joining us. And joining the Yellow Vest is not joining a party or joining a kind of a selective group of people. It's really something that opens wide into the French population as a whole. You even have teachers. You even have even more people from very selective groups. I mean, working class groups, in a sense, who have joined in the very last months the movement because they realize that it's everywhere in hospitals. I mean, you have to imagine some people are dying because there are not even places for them to be saved in hospitals because they have a heart attack and you don't have enough services for that. Something that we never saw in the last 20 years. I mean, it has evolved. It has been some progress has been made, but now we are coming back and back and back, and it's going faster in the direction of going forward than it was in the last 10 years going forward. That's the reason people are sensing, are feeling something really evil is coming back, is happening right now. People are working and not anymore able to fill the bill, give the very elementary stuff to their children. I mean, I've been saying that for some time, but it's what everybody has been looking at in their family, in their surroundings. Some people have no problems, but these guys probably have no heart, because if they don't want to join the movement, it's also because they can't feel anymore what other human beings can feel, what the distress, the poverty, the the situation where there's no hope for their children, and you can't have judgments of some kind of I mean, you can't have judgments on people if you have never been in their situation, and I guess that's what right now the mainstream media is actually very well, in a very professional way, in a sense, pushing for, which is to divide the population from the kind of people who are struggling and the kind of people who are somehow getting along, and they don't see the same daily problems that we see in a majority in the French population.
It definitely seems like the establishment kind of responded to this massive wave of protest by saying, we're just going to shoot your eyes out and make sure you stay home. And that's been kind of the opposite effect since more and more people are coming back. And this movement kind of had everything against it, the media against it. You told me before, some of the newspapers that are actually trying to do a good job here, they're being systematically attacked. A lot of the people who are very loud here, they're also, you said, somewhat put on blacklists, of course, being spied on. The government seems to be making protest illegal, covering your face illegal, which the law just passed in, which is going to bring a very interesting situation tomorrow on the ground, since, of course, a lot of people are going to have to wear gas masks. From what we're hearing, is going to be even more powerful tear gas that's going to be deployed tomorrow on the ground. So the situation is still developing here. We're seeing kind of more conflicts between Antifa destroying property and some of the yellow vests trying to stop them. Where do you see this movement? Where do you see it going? And what do you think about this kind of concentration of people just caring about these kind of numbers and these kind of polls?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because if you think in terms of polls, then you don't understand anything. The polls right now, and it's very well known for, I mean, at least the last 10 months, the last months, is that the polls have been always manipulated. It's very clear. The only question that is to be raised is, if you were in the Second World War and you would see people deported, you would see people getting arrested, would you say, well, the polls say it's not very popular to try to help them, to do something about it? Or, I mean, this kind of question, I'm not exaggerating, because right now that's exactly the manipulative way they're trying to use to divide the population and say, look, these yellow vests, they got and their home back. I mean, they are not in the streets anymore, so they're not as important as we thought anymore. So we should go forward with our policy of destruction of the public services and trying to convince them to understand that the debt has to be paid, and continue with the same policies, which, I mean, they are agreeing with us because they are not anymore in the streets. That's the way they're trying to basically manipulate the population. For some idiots, it's working, but mostly people understand that it's getting very clear by the day that the manipulation is very, very strong in the news media, and anyone trying to defend the Macron's rhetoric and everything that goes with it, with his so-called big debate and so on. I mean, you have some naive people. It exists, and it will always exist. But what they don't understand is that the more they do this, the more people who understand it and start to understand it will shift in the other direction, and probably will become the next leaders in the next generation, because they realize it's a very dark, very evil way of dealing with the suffering of a population.
Yep. And then, of course, we have, I'm happy you brought up the Great Debate, because that's what Macron is using to kind of appease people. He did make some concessions, very small concessions. The major concessions that the people wanted here, part of the bigger Yellow Vest movement, of course, haven't been met. There's been a lot of duplicitous talk by the establishment, by the system, by the media, social media, of course. A lot of things are being manipulated here, but there are a lot of important developments that are happening. Could you quickly tell us what's going on quickly with Italy, with Amazon, and where everything is going from here?
Well, obviously, France is being seen as a very problematic example for the people in place, because if you want to say something about Venezuela, you're really not the best place to talk about Venezuela right now. But they still do it, and they still think it works. It's basically a game, but it's a chicken game. Like, who's gonna go on the right side or on the left side in the first place? It's a suicide game. The elite right now doesn't know what to do anymore. At least they understand that something is shaking, but they don't understand that they have to go for a certain form of transformation, otherwise they will die. And if they will die, they will try to get as many people with them. I mean, like on the Titanic, they think that if it doesn't work, they will try to get as many people with them drowning, and that's their mentality. That's what people have to understand. It's not particular to France. It's particular to some kind of a mindset that has been, I guess, working along since 40 years in each country in Europe, and especially also in the United States. It's something very sick, and people have to, if people want to be different, then they have to understand that being human is not just being against them. It's to also raise certain issues, going out in the streets, going out in every kind of way you can imagine, but being active and say things that people don't say out loud. That means being a bit more courageous than you probably are on a daily basis. It means doing things you probably didn't imagine of yourself before. I mean, you can imagine the leaders of this movement. They are no heroes. These are not people who have a plan in their life. They just realized that that was the time to do something because nobody else would do it, and that's it. You don't have to calculate some kind of understanding of this situation. Everybody, if anyone wants to raise some kind of issues in terms of justice right now, they have to do it. And that's why also some newspapers and journalists in France are still trying to fight back against the atrocities, because this law that was just passed is an atrocity. And one of the House Speaker actually said it was comparable to the regime of Vichy. You know Vichy? It was the people who collaborated with Hitler. And he said it out loud in the parliament. He's not from the left wing, he's not from the right wing, he's from the center. He's a person his grandfather was fighting against the Nazis, and he said exactly this, that these laws are exactly what we saw under the Second World War in France, and that's why people are somehow trying to, I mean, some people are really awakening to the point that it's getting really, really frightening right now. And it's, I guess, not just in France, but in France in particular, it's really frightening.
You can definitely feel that energy here, Bob. Thank you so much. Of course, we're keeping Bob's identity anonymous for a number of reasons. The reasons were discussed in the first video that we did that actually garnered over 1 million views before being throttled. Will people see this video? Will people understand this context that you're not getting on the mainstream media? Well, that's all dependent on you, the viewer, sharing this video. And if really, it's only up to you guys sharing this message, just even being a reporter on the ground here. Many elements of things that we have to go through just to be on the ground, and one of the main reasons why we still are is because of you. So thank you again so much from the bottom of my heart, Bob, for providing us all this important information, giving us some of your time. I know you're extremely busy. And of course, thank you, all you amazing human beings who stayed with us all the way through this video. I love you guys. Thank you again so much for watching. Stay tuned for more here on youtube.com/wearechange, especially tomorrow on the ground during our live stream for the 13th edition of the Yellow Vest Movement. Thank you again.